Greetings and welcome back to 303. We are in Senior English A, and we are working now with the first of our three poems from the Exeter book. I'm with you on page 2021. The first of our three poems is called The Seafarer. The Seafarer. You'll want to obviously have your annotations now out in front of you, and we'll want to work now with the background information on page 21 to begin with. Read this with me if you would please. To the Anglo-Saxon people of Britain, home meant something different from what it means for people today. An Anglo-Saxon warrior viewed himself as the follower of a particular lord or king, not as a citizen of a nation. Gathering in the mead hall, a building dedicated to their feats, a lord and his warriors would share food, drink, entertainment, and fellowship. Smoky, noisy, smelly, and crowded, the mead hall was home. Let's pause for a moment and make a couple of quick observations then. The background to reading this poem is to understand that the Anglo-Saxon warriors, and we saw this already in our study of Beowulf, didn't we? The Anglo-Saxon warriors lived for their king. The warriors lived to defend their king. It wasn't so much about defending their country, it was about defending their king. Therefore, home for them was the place where they slept. And the place where they slept was the mead hall. Remember, mead is just another word for beer, right? It came to it was more than just a bar, though. It was a place where they slept. It was a place where all the communication took place. It was the center hub of the small village. We're now going to listen to and study together the statement of a single speaker. Okay? Later, by the time we study Shakespeare plays, we will call this kind of speech a soliloquy, to speak alone on stage when no one else is there. We're going to hear an Anglo-Saxon warrior who is going to now speak about his challenges, and we are just doing a line-by-line now reading of the play. Read along with me. Follow along. Again, try to improve your reading as you study with me. Don't just listen to me read the poem. Read along yourself and see how well you can begin to understand what is being said. We'll pause momentarily at the end of a few lines, and we'll try and work at level 1, summarizing. At level 2, somehow pointing out major themes, messages, and pointing out some of the literary techniques at 2B. And then, of course, make some relational comments at level 3. Page 21. This tale is true and mine. It tells how the sea took me, swept me back and forth in sorrow and fear and pain, showed me suffering in 100 ships, in 1,000 ports, and in me. Let's pause for a moment. First 5 lines, very straightforward. 2 things. 1, I'm going to tell you a story that is my story, the speaker says. 2, this will not be a happy story. This will not be a happy story. This is going to be a story full of pain. This is going to be a story full of suffering. We are reminded, of course, of the religious traditions on the planet that often make the same point. Remember when Gautama Buddha sits under his Bodhi tree, the very first thing he says when he comes to his enlightenment is, life is dukkha, is his word. Suffering. It's not good. It's a pain. And for any of us that have struggled, which, hello, is all of us, we're going to see a powerful word picture in this poem of what it means to be dislocated, set out on the ocean, in a boat, all by oneself alone, and how badly it feels. He continues at line 5. Let's go back to it. Read with me. The story, it tells of smashing surf when I sweated in the cold of an anxious watch, perched in the bow as it dashed under cliffs. My feet were cast in icy bands, bound with frost. I'm at the top of page 22. With frozen chains and hardship groaned around my heart. Notice the word pictures here, the powerful images. Let's go to 2B for just a moment. The powerful images. He says that, notice the ice. The ice was collecting, bound. He says, my feet were covered in ice. The ice, of course, makes you intentionally feel really cold. We live, of course, in a region in the north here where we have some nasty winters, and so we know what that feels like to have really cold hands or really cold feet, right? Not just cold. Look on page 22, line 11. Hunger tore at my sea-weary soul. No man sheltered on the quiet fairness of earth can feel how wretched I was, drifting through winter on an ice-cold sea, whirled in sorrow, alone in a world blown clear of love, hung with icicles. Whoa, what a compelling word picture here. He says, I was out in the middle of the ocean, really cold, starving. I was so hungry. He says, the people who live back home on land have no idea what I was going through. Now, I've taught in 303 a number of students who have left and gone high school and gone on to the military. And they often have reported back to me that they remembered lines like this that suggest that the warrior alone out, the soldier alone out doing his or her job is usually forgotten by the people back home. They don't even realize often those soldiers are out there making the hard sacrifices. Here, notice, hung with icicles. The word picture is a man maybe with a beard, and the icicles are hanging off. And sometimes when we see a really cold football game, if there's a football player with a beard, you can see this kind of thing, right? From the breathing and the frost. Let's keep going. The hailstorms flew. The only sound was the roaring sea, the freezing waves, the song of the swan might serve for pleasure, the cry of the seafowl, the death noise of birds instead of laughter, the mewing of gulls instead of mead. Storms beat on the rocky cliffs and were echoed by ice-feathered terns, and the eagle's screams. No kinsman could offer comfort there to a soul left drowning in desolation. And it's usually by this point that most of us readers of this poem go, oh, whoa, wait. We got two projects going on at the same time. Let's write them down at level 2A or 2B. First of all, we've got a story about a guy who is stuck in the middle of some nasty, nasty storms, and he's a soldier sailor out there. We might think of the Vikings here out on their boats. But this is also a powerful word picture of what it means to be drowning in desolation. We could jump already to 3B and ask, the last time you felt like you were drowning in desolation, in sadness. Nothing was working out. Nothing seemed to be going right. And you felt totally alone. Now we'll ask at 2A, the difference in your mind between being alone and being lonely. I've had students that will report that they can be in the middle of 100 people sitting in a gym and they are incredibly lonely. I've had other students that will say, I can be totally alone with myself at home, but I don't feel as lonely as I feel when I'm with around all of those people. Here we have an example of a person who is both alone and lonely. And this word, desolation. Now, one of the things we should point out already about this poem is that this is a poem that is designed to make you feel a sense of pity, pathos, for our speaker, who will say, man, I'm in a serious amount of pain. My life is not going very well. And in some ways, allowing then whoever would hear this to identify with the speaker of the poem. Might shock us as well. A strong warrior. What is it we've always been told? Boys aren't supposed to cry. Grown men don't cry. Notice here, this is a cry, isn't it? It is a statement of how sad he is. Let's keep going. I'm on page 22 and roughly line 27. And who could believe, knowing but the passion of cities, swelled proud with wine and no taste of misfortune, how often, how wearily I put myself back on the paths of the sea. He says, who could believe it? I chose this. I could be back on the land. I could be doing, but I chose this. Soldiers today choose to have the experiences they have because they decide to enlist and to serve their country. For that should be given a sense of respect, yes? A sense of honor because they've made that choice. Notice he says, I put myself back on the paths of the sea. Line 31, night would blacken. It would snow from the north. Frost bound the earth and hail would fall. The coldest seeds, and how my heart would begin to beat, knowing once more the salt waves tossing and the towering sea. The time for journeys would come, and my soul called me eagerly out, sent me over the horizon, seeking foreigners' homes. When we studied Beowulf, we asked, why in heaven's name would he get in a boat and sail from Geatland to the land of the Danes? We're told here, there's something about the ocean that calls to him. And he says, now that I'm out here, I'm asking, why did I do this to myself? But calls to him. But, I'm with you at line 39 now on page 22. But, there isn't a man on earth so proud, so born to greatness, so bold with his youth, grown so brave, or so graced by God that he feels no fear as the sails unfurl, wondering what fate has willed and will do. No harps ring in his heart, no rewards, no passion for women, no worldly pleasures, nothing. Only the oceans heave, but longing wraps itself around him. Orchards blossom, the towns bloom, fields grow lovely as the world springs fresh. I'm at the top of page 23. And all these admonish that willing mind, leaping to journeys, always set in thoughts, traveling on a quickening tide. So summer sentinel, the cuckoo, sings in his murmuring voice, and our hearts mourn as he urges. Who could understand in ignorant ease what we others suffer as the paths of exile stretch endlessly on? What an amazing bit of poetry. Let's point out, he asked the question, what is it like to be back home? Can that individual know what I'm going through? And the answer is no. The only way to truly appreciate this level of suffering, he says, is to have been here yourself. Self-chosen exile. Let's write that word exile down. It's a significant part of the readings of the three offerings that we will have from the Exeter book and many of the other readings from Exeter book as well. This idea of dislocation. Dislocation. Right? We already had the word desolation. Now, dislocation. In other words, somehow things don't quite fit. Jump over to page 22 really quickly and the world literature connection. Do you see it in the little box there? The literature of exile. Let's pay attention just to this notion for a few moments and take a few notes. The Seafarer is about exile. I'm just reading with you on page 22 now within that box. The Seafarer is about exile, a long stay away from home that is often enforced but sometimes self-imposed. So let's just get a quick definition of exile. Exile, to be dislocated from where you belong. Seniors who graduate from high school will often say that they feel somehow when they leave home and go away a type of exile. They're excited, but they're also worried. They have great enthusiasm and happiness about being away from home, but they also have a longing at times, what we sometimes call being homesick. Yes? Keep reading with me. The theme of exile has run through world literature since ancient times. Over the centuries, many writers suffered exile and experience that colored their work. Some fled for safety, others were banished for political reasons. In AD 8, for example, the Roman ruler Augustus Caesar sent the poet Ovid into the provinces for writing The Art of Love, which was deemed immoral. Ovid remained there until his death, writing Sorrows, among other works. Italian poet Dante Alighieri was sentenced to exile by his political enemies in 1302. Banished from his beloved native city of Florence, he wrote the Divine Comedy, an epic that describes a journey through hell, sometimes referred to as Inferno, purgatory, and heaven, sometimes referred to as Paradiso. In the following passage from that work, he evokes the suffering of the outcast. Quote, "You shall leave everything you love most. This is the arrow that the bow of exile shoots first." Just as Ovid and Dante went into exile, so did many 20th century writers. For example, the Russian Revolution poet, Marina Testeveva, left Moscow following her husband to Europe, where she wrote poetry filled with longing for her lost home. And now the question, do you think that the exile of the speaker and the seafarer can touch readers in the 21st century today? Why or why not? Of course, this is what we're doing at level 3, isn't it? When we try to relate at 3b to this notion of exile, to feel dislocated, to feel alone. And yet, I'm on page 23 now, lines 57 and following. And yet, my heart wanders away. My soul roams with the sea, the whale's home, wandering to the widest corners of the world, returning ravenous with desire, flying solitary, screaming, exciting me to the open ocean, breaking oaths on the curve of a wave. In other words, he points out his heart has a longing to go off again, to be alone, solitary. In other words, he says, even though I choose this, I'm sad, but I do it again and again. Thus, line 65 on page 23, thus the joys of God are fervent with life, where life itself fades quickly into the earth. The wealth of the world neither reaches to heaven nor remains. No man has ever faced the dawn certain which of fate's 3 threats would fall. This is the way an Anglo-Saxon warrior can die. Look at this list. Illness, or age, or an enemy's sword snatching the life from its soul. The praise of the living pour on the dead, flowers from reputation. Plant an earthly life of profit reaped even from hatred and rancor, of bravery flung in the devil's face, and death can only bring you earthly praise and a song to celebrate a place with the angels, life eternally blessed in the hosts of heaven. Let's pause for a moment and point out that our poet here is asking a very interesting question. It will be one that gets asked over and over in literature. What happens after you die? What happens after you die? So you live as a warrior, you die, then what happens? Of course, the Christian influences of this kind of poetry is going to be clear here. At times, the answer will be, nothing happens after you die. You're like the dog Rover, you're dead all over. The other answer, that's more Christian answer, says there is some notion of reward or punishment after you've lived and died. Take a look at these next lines. The days, line 81 and following, the days are gone when the kingdoms of earth flourished in glory. Now there are no rulers, no emperors, no givers of gold as once there were, when wonderful things were worked among them, and they lived in lordly magnificence. Those powers have vanished. Those pleasures are dead. The weakest survives, and the world continues, kept spinning by toil. All glory is tarnished. Let's just pause for a moment and point out at level 1 what is being said here. Everything seems to be changing. What once was great now is not great anymore. Things are tarnished. That is to say, not as bright as they once were. It is a challenge. Let's just say this out loud. It is a challenge of every generation to recognize whether things are getting better or getting worse. And notice that this is going to be a somewhat pessimistic view that says things were much better once. Now he says, I'm not only alone individually, I'm not only alone geographically, but I am alone culturally. The great culture that I once was a part of is somehow gone. It's moving away. It's gone. Now, of course, anytime you study a culture, you can recognize the ways in which different people within that culture will either talk about how things are getting better or things are getting worse. It's always fascinating to follow, for example, politicians of any stripe who will talk about the way things are. Often politicians will talk about now is not as good as it once was, but the future is going to be better. Interesting. I'm on page 24. The world's honor ages and shrinks, bent like the men who molded. Powerful image, right? As men get older, as men and women get older, they bend over, right? Their faces blanch as time advances, their beards wither, and they mourn the memory of friends. This will sound very much like the lines at the conclusion of the speech by Hrothgar in Beowulf Part 2, when he says, "You're young for a time and you're stunningly beautiful, but as you get older, all of that goes away." As we say, everything sags and bags in the end. Notice, the sons of princes sown in the dust, the soul stripped of its flesh knows nothing of sweetness or sour, feels no pain, bends neither its hand nor its brain. A brother opens his palms and pours down gold on his kinsman's grave, strewing his coffin with treasures intended for heaven, but nothing golden shakes the wrath of God for a soul overflowing with sin, and nothing hidden on earth rises to heaven. This is an interesting little line, and we should point it out for our notes. It seems to suggest that when people died in Anglo-Saxon times, they would sometimes bury their body with gold, and the hope was that when they got to heaven, or to the final place there where God was, judgment, that God would then like the gold and allow them into heaven. This poet seems to suggest otherwise. You can't buy yourself to heaven with gold. The only way you get there is by living a good life right now. It's a very interesting kind of teaching, and certainly that's a 2A observation for us, isn't it? Let's keep going. We all fear God. This is a very strongly Christian poem. We all fear God. He turns the earth. He set it swinging firmly in space. I'm at line 105 on page 24. Gave life to the world and light to the sky. Death leaps at the fools who forget their God. He who lives humbly has angels from heaven to carry him courage and strength and belief. Let's point this one out now. The next line. A man must conquer pride, not kill it. Be firm with his fellows, chaste for himself. Treat all the world as the world deserves, with love or with hate, but never with harm. Though an enemy seek to scorch him in hell or set the flames of a funeral pyre under his Lord. This is an interesting observation. To be a great and mighty Anglo-Saxon warrior, yes, you have to be a strong fighter. Yes, you must be courageous, but you also need to be humble.